Chief Impact Officer at Amira, and we are really glad that you're here watching this video, this conversation with us today about exiting the cycle of exploitation. And I'm here with an amazing human being, Rachel Nemick. She's on our advisory council at Amira. She's a nurse practitioner with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and she's a sexual assault nurse examiner. So she works with a bunch of people who have been exploited, primarily youth, and so she has a lot of knowledge in this area. I'm really glad she's here to talk about this today. Rachel, can you tell our crowd a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yes. Thank you, Mary. That was a really nice introduction. I'm so happy to be here. And like Mary said, my name is Rachel Nemick. I am a family nurse practitioner and do work for the Department of Public Health. And as a sexual assault nurse examiner, I do serve mostly youth, but some adults as well. And I think, one of the reasons why I went into this field is because, particularly when we're talking about exploited individuals, healthcare providers are kind of like, just now kind of coming around to understanding what that process of receiving healthcare is like for exploited individuals, and really starting to appreciate how much we're missing as providers and the work that we really have to do. And so it's such an honor to be part of a group of people who dedicate our time and our energy and our work to improving the experience of survivors as they come in contact with healthcare providers.
So good, so good. So when we talked about doing this conversation together, one of the primary question that came up that we both get a lot is coming from others. Why don't they just leave? Referring to people who are being exploited, whether that be youth or adults. And so I'd love for you to kick us off with your answer to that question, because that's really the center of this conversation.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I do think that's something that feels very easy and natural for people to ask, right? So you see someone that's in an experience or in a relationship or just in a space in their life where it looks like the decisions they're making are not super healthy for them, or they're not in a good place. And so many people who have not experienced exploitation might just sort of lead with that judgment that, well, why would you be here? Why would you continue doing this? And I think, when we talk about exploitation, there are multiple ways that people get involved in the first place. But I think one of the commonalities, speaking from my survivor experience, one of the commonalities is that we all come to this with specific vulnerabilities, right? And so for some of us who have experienced exploitation by an individual, there's a certain process of, what I call sort of indoctrination, right? There's this cultural component to it where we're taught that either this is just something that we are, it's the only thing that we're good at. It's the only thing that we're really is, designed for us to do, that we're not worth more. And so when we're thinking about people exiting, there's a whole lot that goes into that. So there's a lot of that self-talk that has already happened that tells, we tell ourselves that we're not going to ever be able to do anything different than this. We're not going to ever be able to fit in with, quote unquote, normal people. Maybe I don't have the skills to have a different kind of job, right? So if I'm thinking from an adult perspective, I might be thinking about, well, how else am I going to put food on the table for my family or myself? Or, well, where else am I going to find shelter, stable housing? And so there's lots of different barriers that exist for people exiting, and they're as varied as the experiences of survivors. Each one of us is very different. My story is just my story. But I can tell you, as someone who experienced exploitation as a child, it was not easy to reach out and ask for help because, what was I even going to say to the people around me, who I know would have turned around and said, well, this doesn't have to be the way your life is. You can choose differently. But it didn't feel like I could have chosen differently. And so I think, we have to we have to consider what are the barriers both internally and externally in our communities that prevent people from being able to easily make different choices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also when we're thinking about exiting, um, we talk about trauma and healing not being linear. There's a process, and so this is a lifelong journey, of healing. And so exiting is not just one moment, it's an entire process. It's one moment after one moment after one moment, and that can become very overwhelming. And certainly in spaces that we're experiencing now with pandemic, with less resources available potentially for survivors, it gets more difficult than just simply making a decision to stop.
I love what you said, that exit is not a moment, it's a process. And that's just a nugget that I want anyone and everyone in this conversation to take away and remember. It's not a moment, like you said, and you talked a little bit about choice too. And sometimes on the surface, it looks like choices are available, but really underneath things, choice is just a myth in a lot of these situations where you have force, fraud, or coercion present. Um, but there, every process does have a beginning. And I've heard from so many survivors, including my own story. There's this moment, it's like a breaking point that leads to the process of exit. Is that moment of recognizing, I can't do this anymore, or oh my goodness, what's going on? Or you just realizing that the situation you're in is not what you thought it was. And so I'm wondering from your work if you can talk to us a little bit more about what that breaking point looks like and how you've walked with people through that moment and then beyond.
Yeah, so I think first off, that moment looks different for everyone, right? And that moment might not be the only moment, right? So exit, like we talked about, is a process. And for a lot of survivors that I know, and for a lot of the youth that I work with, it's not one time that they try to leave and are successful in that, right? And so with the youth that I work with, many times, when they are ready to consider different options or ready to talk with providers around getting help, um, oftentimes they'll tell us, in lots of different ways, like, I'm tired, right? And as a survivor, that tired is real. That's a soul tired, that's an not just I need to take a nap tired. That's my whole soul, my whole being is really done with this. And that doesn't mean that when you get to that point that it's just going to be an easy switch, right? It just is a moment where your body and your soul tells you this isn't working anymore. This isn't feeling okay. I'm not feeling empowered. I'm not feeling safe. I'm feeling exhausted. And I would like to maybe start to learn about what else is out there for me. So I think it's important for providers to not sort of be looking for one specific thing that tells us people are ready, um, because it looks different for everybody. But having conversations, leaving your doors open, understanding that people are going to maybe go back to the situations that they found themselves in, right? We have the trans-theoretical model of change, by Prochaska and De Clemente, which tells us that change is not just one decision that we make and we stick to it, right? If you think about any type of behavior change you've ever made, a habit you've tried to kick, it part of that process is that relapse process, that going back. And so we see that a lot with the youth that we serve. Certainly myself as a survivor, it's not just a one day you wake up and decide my life is just going to be different from here on out, right? If you don't have the support systems in place, if our systems are, sometimes not designed to be easy for people to exit out of. And so that's a different place that people get to. And I think the important thing for providers to remember is that's a process that has to happen individually for every single human. And they may not be there when they're working with you, and that's okay.
Yeah, and exit, they, the average is actually multiple attempts at exit, and particularly challenging when we're considering the nuances of trauma bonds and if there's, familial presence in the situation. Like you said, I mean, it's almost like literally choosing to leave an entire life, an entire system, an entire community, and go solo. Um, so let's talk about what exit actually looks like. Um, because it's not this just, open the door, walk out, get on the bus, go to a new life. It's very different. So can you share with us what it looks like in reality on the ground? What are the factors?
Yeah, so I think in order to expect that someone is going to be, quote unquote, successful at exit is really making sure, do they have their basic needs met in some way, right? Is there what are their needs? Do they need help with housing? Do they need a roof over their head? Do they need a way to feed their kids or themselves? Um, all of those things have to be in place for someone to be successful at moving on to a different stage in their life. And if we don't have those things in place, then it makes it really hard to survive in any other way. I think, we should have an expectation, and we should provide some um, anticipatory guidance to survivors that, hey, this is going to be a process, and this isn't going to be easy, and this isn't going to happen overnight. There are going to be moments where, you might not miss everything about your experience, but there might be things that you do miss. Um, certainly for some of the youth that we serve that go into foster homes or group homes or independent living places, they're used to coming and going as they please on some level. They're not used to really having to report to a group home or meet with clinicians or do all of the things that we expect them to be able to do. And that can be really overwhelming and really frustrating. And oftentimes the things that we put in place that we think are helpful can actually be triggers that encourage kids to leave our facilities and to disengage with providers. So I think, finding ways to meet basic needs, um, teaching survivors how to have a healthy relationship with money is a big thing. That financial literacy is huge. When money has only meant one thing, and that's been pain or suffering or transaction, you know, uh, it can be really difficult to learn how to have a healthy relationship with money. Um, and then, talking about what it's like to interact with people who may not understand what it is you've experienced, your complex trauma, and who may just kind of expect you to be grateful, right? We have a lot of providers who will say, well, you know, she's here, she's in our facility, or he's here, he's in our facility. Like, what else more could they need, right? They're safe, they've got a roof over their head, we're paying for them to, do all these things. What else could they want? But from on a basic human need level, we all want connection. We all strive to belong. We all want to be cared for and loved. And so, it's more than sometimes just the very basic. And so, I think people underestimate that. It's difficult. It's really, really difficult. And it's a lifelong journey.
Mhm. So, from your perspective as a healthcare provider and someone who works with other types of providers, can you share with us what roles providers can play in this process that are healthy, that can, you know, I hate to use the word success because that it gives this feeling of like accomplishment or goal, and really we want to put the survivors or the exploited individuals at the center. But can you tell us about how providers can be involved?
Yeah. So I think first of all, linking up with organizations that are survivor led and survivor informed is crucial, because we can all go to workshops on like what is human trafficking and what is sex trafficking, what is labor trafficking, but that's different than learning about how does this impact an individual, and how can I best support an individual who has experienced complex trauma. So, a lot of the times our systems are designed um, to be exploitative, obviously not intentionally, but a lot of times we expect things from people in order to provide the services. And I'll give you an example. We have, kids who are in, foster care or in group homes, and they're expected to sort of follow case plans or treatment plans that they may not have had a whole lot of um, a big part in creating for them. And so it's a bunch of rules that they have to follow. And if they don't follow them, there's some type of consequence. But what people sometimes fail to understand about, those of us who have experienced exploitation is everything starts to feel like a transaction at some point. I have to give you something to get something in return. And so when our systems mimic that exploitation, even unintentionally, it can just do so much harm, and cause so much damage in the relationships that we're trying to build, the trusting relationships that we're trying to build with the youth that we serve. So providers should do their best to critically analyze the policies and procedures that they have in place, and really examine it under a lens of, is this going to potentially feel exploitative to a youth, or an adult for that matter? Am I asking for something in return, or am I able to provide services completely unconditionally?
Mm-hmm.
What am I expecting from this person? And are they logically, are they able to give that to us right now in their state? Having to heal from complex trauma, feeling like you're in survivor mode all the time, it can be exhausting, and it can really limit one's ability to interact with providers in a way that's going to benefit anyone. Um, I think helping survivors to navigate our systems is helpful. Our systems are not designed to be very friendly to survivors. And so, it can be overwhelming to navigate the criminal justice system, the civil justice system, the medical system, the foster care system. All of our systems are really dizzying. And, for providers, we understand it. We work in it every day. But if you don't work and live in these systems, then it can be very overwhelming. It can be very scary, and it can cause harm. And so helping people navigate systems will help them to be able to engage in a way that's much more beneficial for them.
Mm-hmm. Such a good piece of wisdom. Thank you for that. Well, I want to wrap up our conversation here with one last question, which is, for the people watching this, what is one thing that you would want them to take away from this conversation?
I think um, that's a really good question. I think what I try to impart on the people that I speak with and train and just talk to regularly is that survivors have real superpowers. We understand people and we read people better than just about any group of individuals, and we've had to in order to survive. But that means we know when you're not bringing your authentic self to the table. We know when providers are too busy to care about us. Um, we read situations really well. That's our superpower. And so, in order to be a true ally for survivors, you have to understand that you're not here to rescue us. We rescue ourselves. We are powerful. We have survived things that most people wouldn't even, dream about. Um, and we're powerful, right? And so, not underestimating that about us. We may be experiencing trauma. We may be unable to navigate systems sometimes, but we have some skills that would astound you if you just look for them and ask and help us to cultivate them. and not exploit them.
That is so true. That is so good. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here and having this conversation with me. And I hope for everyone watching that this was beneficial, that it shed some more light on another aspect of exploitation as you journey to, become an ally or on your journey as a survivor. And thank you so much for watching this with us. I encourage you to go check out the rest of the videos in the series. Rachel, again, thank you for being with us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Mary.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.